Good evening. I call this meeting to order at 6:14 p.m. Tonight we have Directors Teitler, DeFreitas, Ramirez, and myself present in person, and Director after attending remotely, meaning we have a quorum. Thank you to our interpreter, Susanna. Would you please share the interpretation instructions for our participants, and then we can turn on the interpretation function. The first business in order is the approval of the agenda. Directors, are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I was going to ask if we could move some things off their consent agenda.
There's an opportunity to do that when we get to that action item.
Later.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I make a motion to approve it. Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye from Director After as well. Our next agenda item is our opening celebrations and updates by our interim superintendent, Dr. Anna Cole.
All right. Well, it's been a busy couple weeks. Want to celebrate first off that last week was our very first 2-hour delay, which was a new tool that we were ready to use and had been preparing and communicating for, and we got our first chance to do that. And so I just really want to appreciate and thank our transportation, facilities, and grounds crews. And those teams, and this work was really led by Chief Operating Officer Ben Baumfalk, Director of Transportation Jared Rains, and Director of Facilities Eric Willis. And for folks who don't know, it was a snowy week, and as early as the Sunday before last week, our grounds crews at 2 a.m. Monday morning were working to clear parking lots. And so by the time that storm started to come Wednesday afternoon, they had already had a lot of very early mornings. But they were up Thursday morning at 2 a.m. clearing parking lots. The team was, per our protocols, on the phone, assessing the weather. We know we made that call Wednesday night, which was great, and I think really helped families adjust and get information out there. The team, though, continued to assess the weather Thursday morning to make sure it'd be safe later in the day so that we could still get to school. So also want to thank Public Information Officer Jonathan Landon, our bilingual communications specialist, Christina Vargas, and really the teams across the district, flexibility and hard work and follow through to make sure that we could manage the snow that was everywhere and ensure and communicate safe conditions and get our kids to school. And we are so grateful for our families and their flexibility. Attendance was down, which is to be expected, but not by as much as we thought we would see. And so the fact that we were able to salvage and preserve some learning time for kids in what felt, I think for a lot of schools, a pretty normal day because they had been prepared was a real win. So our teams are debriefing. We're still hearing input on what worked, what didn't, how we can improve, but we're really celebrating that we were able to preserve that learning time for students with that new protocol. Also want to thank this week. Last night we were at Roaring Fork High School. Last week we were at Basalt High School. We had to cancel the Glenwood Springs High School forum because of the weather, but we're grateful for all the families and partners who attended our community forums around drug prevention strategies. They, just gave us a huge donation of time and expertise and shared concerns and recommendations. Really thankful for Executive Director of Schools, Joel Hathaway, and the team that really developed the curriculum and content for those evenings. Grateful for the staff, and we had a number of different staff and leaders facilitate the programs, and really want to celebrate and acknowledge the Director of the Family Resource Center, Kelly Medina, who ran both Spanish sessions. And boy, last night at Roaring Fork High School was really a dynamic environment that she facilitated with really high levels of engagement and creating a really safe place for opposing views on some of the strategies we were proposing. So really grateful for the turnout and for the engagement with that topic with our communities. So what's happening next is we'll be recording both the English and the Spanish sessions to post online with a Google form. So folks who weren't able to attend can get access to all the information and then share their feedback online. So folks should look for that coming out in the next week or so. Continuing to meet with students. So I'll be visiting all the high schools, having lunch with students, asking similar questions, having these same conversations. And so we're really reflecting on what we've heard, and then we'll be working with our leadership teams to kind of determine next steps and where we need to head. And as I've mentioned before at the board meetings, this is also kind of part of some broader communications and forums that we'll be having around school safety and security the last week of February. So if you didn't get to attend, didn't get a chance, please look for the recording online. And then please keep an eye out. We'll start probably in the next 2 weeks or so to have flyers and communication about the school safety meetings in February. This time of year is also a great time to celebrate our emerging bilingual students because they are taking their English language proficiency assessments, which we call access tests. So those are happening right now for all of our emerging bilingual students, including students with disabilities. And students are working really hard to demonstrate their levels of English language proficiency, and our schools are wrapping around them to really administer this very dynamic assessment. And so a big thanks to the families making sure their kids are ready to show off their skills, and for staff who are supporting all of our emerging bilingual students through this assessment. And then finally, and I am so excited to make this public celebration, but we are able to confirm that next year we will welcome members of the class of 2042 to the Roaring Fork Schools. So if you do the math, what you'll realize is that, excuse me, some of those like little demons or little lambs or tiny tadpoles or baby calves aren't even born yet. So we are our early childhood team is finalizing the state licensing process to open 2 infant classrooms next year. One will be at Basalt Elementary, one will be at Riverview. They'll serve children age 6 weeks to 1 year. So we're super excited. We've never had that before. We're delighted to align this program with our early childhood education program. So although there'll be small classrooms, space will be prioritized for children with disabilities, low-income families, emerging bilingual children, or staff students. So it's still very small. It won't be a huge dent in some of the childcare needs, but we're excited to start moving into this space. We will continue to do what we do, especially in our toddler rooms and in our preschool rooms, of leveraging multiple funding streams to make tuition affordable. And then the board will learn more kind of about the logistics at upcoming meetings as the early childhood enrollment launches. We need to get the tuition approved by you all. So you'll look for that in an upcoming board meeting. But super excited about those little guys who, again, aren't even born yet and will be in the Roaring Fork Schools next year. So those are our celebrations.
Thank you. The next business in order is our superintendent report featuring a high-level forecast of revenues presentation from Chief Markham.
So my superintendent report, we're going to take a deep dive into the 2024-25 revenue from the general. This will be the first of many budget presentations. We begin with revenue. Deep dive.
Sorry, I'll get to that.
Okay. Okay, so first, again, we're going to be both educational and informative tonight. We're going to be looking at the general fund, but first, what is the general fund? Well, overall, a fund is a grouping of related accounts, and it's used to maintain control or segregate specific sources of revenue and their corresponding expenditures. A very easy one for us to think about is our food service fund. That's exactly what it sounds like. We pay food service expenditures out of there up against food service revenues. Our general fund is the primary fund used by the district. These are the core operational tasks of the district: instructional support, administrative, tech, maintenance, all those sorts of things come out of the general fund. Currently, we're looking at the 24-25 estimates for next year. We're looking at a total per pupil amount of $18,687 per pupil. That's close to $96 million, which is up about $1.6 million from the current year projection. So we're going to start, this slide is just a high-level summary that's broken into total program funding, other local revenue, other state revenue, and federal revenue. Those are the primary sources, and each of those will have line items within them, but broken out for ease of viewing and consumption here. You can see transfers to other funds is expected to decrease by $7.3 million. That primarily reflects, we'll be wrapping up construction at Meadowood, and there won't be the general fund transfer for that this coming year. That leaves net revenues of $82.8 million, or $16,141 per pupil. So now let's start to dive a little deeper into these sources of revenue. First off, you can see the chart here. It's hard to see up on this screen, but local revenue comprises the largest source for the district. We're looking at close to 75% or $70 million for the district. This reflects the increasing property values locally and the corresponding shift from state subsidized or state subsidies to local funding. We do receive some small federal funds in the general fund, but it's less than 2%. So we're going to look at total program funding first, and this should be confused with total or grand total revenue. This is a component of the total revenue that's in general fund. Total program can be a misleading term, but it's the term used by the Colorado legislature, CDE, so it's something that we adhere to here as well. This is approved every spring by the Colorado legislature. They pass a School Finance Act, which comprises at its most basic a per pupil amount for every district and a funded pupil count for every district. Multiply those two together, you get your total program funding. Next year, we're estimating that total program funding will make up 70% of the budget, the budgeted revenue, and currently we're looking at $11,789 per pupil. So we said at its most basic, it's per pupil amount times the number of pupils. So first we'll look at the per pupil amount, and it starts to get pretty complicated pretty quickly. Every district is awarded a base amount. That is where every district starts from, and then individual unique characteristics for each district, different factors are applied against that base amount. So we have a cost of living factor adjustment, which for our district is very important. We typically are the second or third highest cost of living in the state for the study that the Colorado legislature uses to set that amount. There's a personnel cost factor. So the cost of living only affects the portion of the base that's related to paying salaries and benefits. There's a size factor. Smaller districts receive more because there's loss of scale at a smaller district. So you'll see some small districts, with several hundred students that might have a per pupil amount and, $18,000, $19,000 per pupil. There's an at-risk student factor. Districts with higher free and reduced lunch counts receive additional funding. There's an ELL factor, which is a new factor of the last 3 or 4 years, and it provides money to districts for their ELL populations. And of course, the infamous budget stabilization or BS factor that basically allows the state to reduce school funding, and it allows them to balance the state budget. The state's contribution to K-12 education makes up about 1/3 of their overall general budget. So when it comes time to look for a lot of money, unfortunately, K-12 was one of the line items to look at. The good news is currently we're at about $1 million lost in revenue. Due to that, next year it's estimated that the BS factor will be bought down completely for the first time in over a decade. So we're looking at $0 reduction from the budget stabilization factor. So that's something to celebrate. It is also, we should note that the BS factor has withheld over $10 billion from K-12 schools over the last decade plus. Okay. So after looking at the per pupil amount, let's have a look at the funded pupil account or funded pupil count. And it starts with enrollment. And again, like a lot of this, it's not super straightforward, but the district and the state estimates its enrollment for the following year. On October 1st, the state takes the official enrollment count. Any difference between that October count and the estimate provided in the spring is adjusted for, but it's not as simple as counting heads. They take the larger of either your current enrollment or a 2-year, 3-year, 4-year, or 5-year average. They basically look at 5 numbers and they take the highest one. And this basically allows districts with a declining enrollment to ease into that lower funding environment. So for us in 2021, we lost about 350 students the first year of the COVID pandemic. Rather than losing 350 pupils worth of funding, we lost something substantially less because it was averaged over the past 5 years. Currently this year, we're benefiting by 8 pupils at about $11,000 per pupil. So we're about in the last year of our averaging, we should be pretty flat from here on out. So here are the current enrollment estimates. So these are counting heads, and the numbers in the chart do reflect the 2 charter schools as well. So you can see for the current estimate, we are using a flat enrollment from last year at 5,653. We are down slightly this year compared to 22-23 by about, what is that, 9 students. And you can see our funded pupil count there at the bottom, which in our case is the 5-year average. 525 pupils are enrolled at district charters, and we pass that money directly through. So at the $11,789 per pupil times 525, that's $6.2 million we pass through to Carbondale Community and Two Rivers Community Schools. So let's put total program funding all together. So on the last slide, we saw the 5,656 funded pupils. We multiply by $11,789 per pupil. And that results in $66.7 million of total program funding. Total program funding, while set by the state, has 3 different funding sources. The first funding source is local property tax. So each year, and recently back in early January, this board passed the mill levy rates for the current year. One of those will raise money to fund total program funding. And we're estimating that's $46.7 million next year. Additionally, we collect local tax in the form of specific ownership tax. That's basically car registrations. And then whatever those 2 don't raise, the state backfills, and that's referred to as state equalization. So again, the total program funding bucket is a portion of grand total, and total program funding has 3 funding sources. You can see local property tax makes up the lion's share, 70%. And again, that's reflective of both an increasing mill rate and an increase in property values. So beyond total program funding, there's other local funding, the biggest which is our mill levy overrides. So state statute limits what districts can raise, and we are currently maxed out. A big thank you to our local taxpayers and voters. They've wholeheartedly supported K-12 education in our district. Next year, the mill levy override is expected to raise about $17.5 million. That's about $3,088 per pupil. Other sources, specific ownership taxes beyond what's in total program funding. So there's another stream that comes in that is outside total program. ECE tuition, any interest on delinquent taxes, interest on invested cash, which has taken on a greater importance when interest rates were near 0. That was kind of a rounding error. And now it's in excess of $1 million every year. In total, we're looking at $3,902 per pupil from other local funding. So we'll take a close look at our MLO, since that's the biggest portion of other local funding. These must be approved by local district voters. The maximum amount allowed is 25% of total program funding, and that includes the CSI students. So CSI, Charter School Institute, that would be Ross Montessori School in our district. We are at the maximum allowed per law. This year, we're at $17 million, or $3,000 per pupil. And again, next year, we're looking at about $17.5 million. Moving on to other state funding. Right now, we're going to exclude universal pre-K revenue. And if you look at that, it's $568 per pupil. That comes in the form of READ Act, transportation reimbursements, special education, and then English Language Proficiency Act. These are all grant related and are used to pay for specific items. READ Act is K-3 literacy, transportation. They reimburse a portion of our transportation expenses. Special education from the state ECA, which has increased in recent years. They're now fully funding what they had promised they would fund. And English language proficiency, again, it's an additional grant to provide support for ELL education. Something the school district has received, I think for the past 7 years, is one-time funds called rural school funds through a variety of sources. This current year, there was $30 million in the School Finance Act, worked out to $173 per pupil, or just over $980,000 for our district. Currently, there are no supplemental rural funds budgeted for next year because it has to be an individual appropriation or individually accounted for every year. We have been considering those one-time funds. We are not using that to pay for recurring costs. We've been very careful about that. So when you look at on one of the first slides we had, current year budget and the difference, that decline in state support is the exclusion of rural funds from next year. And then, as I mentioned before, we do get some federal funding, primarily in the form of IDEA, which again is a specific support for special education. It's about $1.2 million in next year's budget. We also receive Medicaid reimbursements, and the local plan that we have in place supports the family liaison positions. This is just a smaller snapshot of what we looked at earlier. You can see total revenues before transfers are close to $96 million. And then net revenues, we're looking at 82.8. With that, I'll turn it over to board discussion.
Thank you, Chief Markham. We'll now go around and have 2 minutes each. Director Tytler has asked for some extra time through this process, so if you need extra time, just let us know. And would you like to kick us off?
Sure, and
Great.
more of the time I was looking for is later when we go through your other budget
Okay.
proposal. I had more questions there. So,
Okay, sorry.
but I did have a few questions here
We can
also.
start with you. Go ahead.
The first question, I know you just mentioned it, Chief Markham, about us not getting the supplemental rural funds. Can you explain just a little bit more about, is that something that could be coming, or is that something that's not coming?
It could be coming. I just don't know in what form. So 3 years prior to this year, it came from Prop E taxes, which now Prop E funds universal pre-K. This year was a special allocation within the School Finance Act calling for $30 million, but it's not baked into any kind of permanent stream of funding. It has to be allocated and debated over every year. They are debating some formula changes, and it wouldn't surprise me if that was in order to pay for some of those changes, those rural funds were appropriated for that purpose. But right now, out of just an air of caution, we're excluding that.
Great. Another question I have is, when we look at that last chart that you showed us, where it sort of was an overview, and it shows us moving $13 million as a transfer to other funds, and that's for Meadowood, I'm understanding, right?
Next year, that 13 million will not include any Meadowood funds. Meadowood is expected to be paid for fully.
Right,
this
so
year.
but this is mostly Meadowood.
No, that $13 million is not Meadowood. It excludes any contributions to Meadowood, but it will fund our capital projects. There's transfers to our designated purpose fund, our grants fund that supports the pre-collegiate program, the Family Resource Center, any support for the food service fund, insurance fund, our tech mill fund, a variety of other funds. So revenue flows in here and then it's moved to other funds for specific purposes.
So that $13 million that's transferring to other funds does not include Meadowood.
No, not next year. This year's, if you go to the
This
first-
year's it does, and it's like 7 million of that 13 million, correct? 7.7
Yeah,
million.
so
or
this
something.
year's transfer of the funds is $20.3 million. Next year's is 13. So that's $7.3 million that is not being transferred out. And that's the Meadowood portion, correct?
And so then can we assume somehow like next year, there'll be an extra like 7 million available for something else that's not available this year?
The way that we're asked to report revenue is a little confusing because really we transferred $7 million to Meadowood from reserves. We showed a huge like over expenditure, revenues were less, but really it was using reserves.
Okay, so that
Yeah.
was just from
Yeah.
reserves. Great. And then I have one more question from the very beginning slide. Is there a reason why that preliminary revenue estimate slide had 22-23 as projected and then 24-25 as the preliminary budget? Why are we missing a year there?
So yeah, good catch. It looks like that 22-23 should be this current year.
Okay, so that should
Yeah.
just be
Yeah.
labeled this year.
Yeah, apologies for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Tytler. Director After, we'll go to you. Let us know if you want us to turn off mics.
Okay, how's that sound? Good? Okay, thank you for the presentation, Chief Markham. I just had a couple of questions quickly here. First of all, what are ESSER funds and I understand that those are not included in the budgets going forward. What were those and what's the significance of not having access to them?
So ESSER refers broadly to 3 separate grants that the federal government made to support not just K-12, but all sorts of public services across the nation in response to COVID. We are in the final year spending down our ESSER funds. So those were all treated as one-time funds. We tried our hardest not to spend those on recurring expenses. And where we did, we were very clear that, these positions would go away when funding expired. And we expect to expend those by the deadline of September 30th, 2024.
Okay. Thank you. Can you talk through seeing the revenue budget is helpful. Can you talk through the process for the board approving the expense budget? What is that process like? You don't need to give like specific dates. I'm just curious what the overall process looks like for the board.
So we'll start to bring strategic investments tied to our strategic plan, both to board work sessions and to the board to present. A lot of the new money that we're investing next year, or hoping to invest next year, is tied to our UIP and our learning acceleration plan, which is really the way to address deficiencies in the UIP. We'll present those on an upcoming basis. Operationally, at the end of this month, next week, we'll distribute first rounds of budgets to schools. We'll have a look at what resources they have. We allocate resources as much as we can based on student need. Certainly there are shortcomings in there where we're not doing it as well as we could. But again, that's on the strategic plan to try and address as best as possible. As schools build their budgets and get better student counts, we continue to update those, and we try to come back to the board as much as possible. That way, in June, it's not, here's a 50-page document, please read it over the weekend and approve, that you're already kind of up to speed, and it's hopefully at that point, nothing's a surprise.
Great, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Director After. Director Ramirez.
Thank you, Chief Markham. I'm always excited when you come present to us about our budget. So I hope you do it more often. And I really enjoyed this presentation. I think it's super important to point out in slide 12, when we talk about the mill levy override, to always point out what that means for us to be at the maximum allowed per law. Can you share a little bit more about what that means for us?
Certainly, Colorado statute caps what we can raise locally beyond the School Finance Act. It caps it at 25% plus. I think they call it a cost of living adjustment, which is like fixed, I think, from like 2002. So basically, we take 25%, add that cost of living, and that's the most we can raise every year. So our mill levy can increase by either inflation or up to that amount. And right now, we tend to hit that cap every year.
Do you have a prediction when we'll be able to utilize a MLO again?
I don't. I mean, a lot of it depends on inflation and the growth in total program funding.
Thanks. I don't have any other questions, but I just want to say I'm excited for our finance committee to start. Thank you.
Thank you. Director DeFreitas.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Just following up on Jasmine's question, sorry, I didn't catch it. When did you say the cost of living, whatever was established?
It's a fixed $800 and some thousand, and I think it was in the early 2000s. So I'm not sure. I know it's one of the things I know I'm supposed to edit in, and so I do. CDE is fantastic about providing their estimates as well. We tie exactly on the per pupil amounts. Usually we'll differ a little bit on the student counts until we get October done, and then we'll match exactly. So I'm always doing my best to mimic and use the formulas they provided while doing my own double check. But, it seems to me to be a bit of a fudge factor. But
Might
we
have gone
take
up
it.
a little bit in the last 20%.
Yeah.
Thank you. And is that set by the state or?
Yeah, it's in the state spreadsheets, and I'll admit I just added in because I know I'm supposed to.
Quick question also at the state level. I know that the budget stabilization factor down to 0, was that legislation that's already in place, or is that based on, why is it 0 next year?
Both chambers of the House of Representatives and State Senate, as well as Governor Polis, have been talking about buying down that to 0 for a long time. They've been echoing, and the governor's budget proposal from November reflects it as $0. So that's the current estimate we're using. Certainly, any big economic change between now and when they approve or pass the final iteration in May could alter that. But it's a commitment, not just from Democrats, but from both sides of the aisle to buy that down.
So that still has to go through legislation?
Yeah.
All the way. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
all the way.
Do early childhood pupils count in counting heads? I couldn't catch that.
They no longer do. They used to for the Colorado preschool program, but with the advent of universal pre-K, there's now a separate funding stream for that. So it comes in separately.
And does that include the little tykes that we're welcoming next year?
Currently, it doesn't.
Would it? Because they're not preschool?
It's a bit complicated because we collect money from UPK from the state, from tuition, from people who owe tuition. There's just a variety of sources. So I work closely with Anna and the ECE team to try and get that as close as possible. So that's certainly something we would update. I know our goal is to run a break-even ECE program. Right now, the general fund, general education, does subsidize the ECE program slightly. And really, I think it's about the tune of the health benefits, which is something a lot of private providers wouldn't offer, at least as robust, I feel, as we do.
Thank you. Is there a sunset on the English Language Proficiency Act? I couldn't tell what you said from here.
No, ELPA funds are pretty recurring, and they don't have to be approved every year. They increase by, I believe it's a set inflation amount every year.
And is that dependent? I mean, how is that count established? Access testing or?
So it's based on your number of, I'm not going to put, NEP is near English, non-English proficient or limited English proficient, and the state funds for up to 5 years. So if a student has been NEP or LEP counted for 7 years, they are excluded from that count, 6 years excluded. It's important to note when we allocate resources to buildings for English language learner support, we do not set an exclusionary on it. We count however long you're in the program, NEP or LEP, we allocate resource for that. So beyond what the state does.
Okay. And you asked for all schools, so thank you. That was all my questions.
I just have a few more. On the initial budget projection, that first slide is the 13% reduction in state revenue. Is that from the rural school funds?
Yes, the rural school funds is a loss of about 900 and what
Okay.
they say, $80,000.
And then I see that our overall total revenue is only projected to increase 2%, which is a little concerning because it seems like it's not even keeping up with inflation. Do you have any reservations about that or thoughts around that small increase?
Certainly on the overall budget projections, again, we're not, the loss of the rural schools funds, we're not paying recurring salaries out of that. We're not paying, again, to the extent possible, we're not paying for recurring expenses. Our total program funding is going up by 4%. That's where a lot of increases in recurring expenses will come from, is the increase in our total program funding. So slightly concerning, but not, at this point, not overly so.
Still hopeful that that funding will come through.
Yeah.
Through the legislative session.
Yeah.
And then my last question is really about enrollment count. I thought that we saw the jump. I know we saw the jump when Two Rivers was approved as a district charter. And for some reason, I thought that we had rolled some of our early childhood students in to our overall count in the last few years, but I'm curious if those are still projected here with flat enrollment. Or what leads you to believe and project that enrollment will be flat?
So right now we're beginning the enrollment projections for next year. I basically used what we had this year as just a starting point. So that is something I expect to change as we get further into the process. Again, Colorado preschool program kids used to flow through and receive this per pupil amount. Now it's separate and removed. So we did see a decrease year over year in that. And then they've adjusted for Two Rivers as if Two Rivers had always been in the district. So that in the funded pupil account, it doesn't show up. Yeah.
Okay. I don't have anything else. So we'll move into 5 minutes of open board discussion. Director, after, if you have something, would you mind using the raising your hand function just so we can turn off mics and you're ready to make that shift?
I have one more question, Chief Markham, on the line that says, I'm sorry, I just lost my slide. Where it was talking about the, darn it. It was about there it is. What is the FY 24 projection? Is that like future year projection or?
Fiscal year.
Fiscal year. I'm not understanding the difference between the transfers out as $18,687 versus $18,344 and that $1.7 million difference between where's that difference come from on slide number on the bottom of slide 3?
Okay.
So total revenue before transfers is $18,344 per pupil for the current year. Again, that heading is mislabeled. And it's expected to be $18,687 for the upcoming year. That difference is $1.7 million. And you can see the change line by line for everything above that.
I'm still not understanding. If you can help me a little bit more.
Can you restate your question, please?
I'm just not understanding the difference between those two lines of the 95.9, where that comes from, and where does the 94.2 come from?
It's the summation of everything above it. So it's total program plus other local, plus other state, plus federal.
Okay. So two different budget years.
Mhm.
Yes. So one is, again, the first column is the current year, what we expect for that to happen this year. And then 24, 25, the upcoming year is what we expect.
Thank you.
I just wanted to take a second to remind our new colleagues that there is, and all of our team, that there is a certificate in education finance through Edunomics that Director Kuhlenberg, Chief Markham, and myself were able to get. And I think it's just really important for us to be able to understand how good school funding can help student success. And so I just want to encourage our board members and anyone from our staff, our leadership team who might be interested to reach out for more information or to look it up.
Any other questions or comments for Chief Markham? Director After?
Thanks. Just one more question on that cost of living adjustment. So Director Kuhlenberg's question.
Just a
earlier.
second, Betsy. There we go.
Okay. Is that better? Okay. Thanks. On the cost of living adjustment, now I understand that to be can you guys hear me? I'm getting an echo.
Yes.
Okay. The cost of living adjustment, that's not it sounds like that's a cost of living adjustment. Am I good? Okay. It seems like that's a cost of living adjustment based on our location, not a traditional cost of living adjustment based on the cost of the national cost of living calculation rate going up. Is that right?
Yeah, so the cost of living adjustment that's within the total program funding, that
Mhm.
affects the per pupil amount, is a local RE1 specific cost of living factor. The cost of
this-
living I was referring to that affects the MLO again is this fixed amount that they refer to as cost of living from, that's just this historical amount that's kind of out there. So they're kind of two different things, similar name.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. That answers my question.
Anything else from the board on this? Thank you as always, Chief Markham, for your guidance and education on finance. And we look forward to having you back for future budget discussions.
And I'll be back in about 30 minutes.
Yep. At this time, we welcome members of the public who have signed up to address the board. There are two speakers signed up tonight. Board allots 45 minutes for public comment. To respect the time of all who are present, speakers are to limit their remarks to 3 minutes or less. Reminder to all speakers to uphold our procedures for public comment. We ask you to be thoughtful and constructive with your comments, and thank you in advance for sharing your feedback. Members of the public who wish to share their views with the board may always do so in writing at any time. For this evening's public comment, we received one written comment. Our first speaker is Ana Chavira.
Hi, my name is Ana Chavira. I am an alumni. I was a parent in the district and a previous employee for the district. Today, I am here to say thank you for the time each one of you board members took last week to hear members of the community in regards to the hiring process of the next superintendent. Jasmine, thank you for being open and quick to answer questions community members had. Kenny, thank you for facilitating such an open conversation. Lindsay, thank you for hearing the community's concerns and wishes while keeping the best interest centered. While I appreciate each one of you, I can't stress enough the fact that more diversity and inclusion is needed in every step of the process when it comes to decision making. I've firsthand seen the lack of inclusion of the Latino community in the decision-making process. I continue to see the lack of such in the previous weeks. In the meetings I've joined as a parent organizer for Voces Unidas, I didn't see an accurate representation of students and families of our district. When making decisions, we need to ensure that all voices are heard, but when meetings are being hosted at 10 a.m. on a weekday, our working families would not be able to participate. While I know it's important for my own community to take ownership and responsibility, I still encourage you to keep on looking for opportunities to reach Latinos, whether it be different modalities, different spaces, and or different times where voices of Latinos can be heard. I can speak for a large majority and express that my expectation now, our expectation now is that the Superintendent Search Advisory Committee includes members who embody and speak for minorities of this valley. The community that the community is equitable and bilingual. The school district is over 50% Latino. Demanding that the advisory committee reflect that is only fair. I challenge the board to ensure this happens regardless of the application turnout. When it comes to decision-making, engagement of the Latino community is crucial to the success of the district in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Alan Munoz Valenciano.
Hola, buenas tardes. My name is Alan Munoz Valenciano. Currently, I work as the regional manager for Voces Unidas, a nonprofit organization based here in our valley. But more importantly, I'm someone who grew up here in the valley. And as a Latino who grew up here in the valley, I have first-hand experience of having to deal with a community where my needs weren't being considered, where I had no choice but to work twice as hard, but only receive half as much compared to others. The most concerning part about this is that it's still happening in a lot of students, a lot of Latino students in our district are facing the same challenges that I faced when I was in their age. We all need to recognize and acknowledge that this is unacceptable and that this issue needs to be a top priority for the Board of Education and for the executive leadership team at the Roaring Fork School District. As an organization, we work directly with parents, students, and community members who experience these issues every single day, and yet we haven't seen the real-life changes that need to be made to ensure that every Latino student and all students in general are able to succeed. Our organization is involved in education because we care about how our schools are preparing the future leaders of our valley. Latino and Latina students make up a majority of the Roaring Fork School District, yet there's still a significant achievement gap between white and Latino students. Because of this lack of student success in the district, Voces Unidas launched a campaign back in 2023 to hold the Roaring Fork School District accountable for the unacceptable outcomes of Latino students. This includes holding the district accountable for drastically improving Latino student achievement, drastically improving parental engagement with Latino parents, and the need to recruit, hire, and retain teachers and administration that resemble the population of the student body. So here's where we're at today. In our Roaring Fork School District, over 55% of the student population is Latino. Yeah, we have a 40% achievement gap between Latino and white students, and only 10% of teachers across the district identify as Latino or Latina. This should make it clear that a policy that addresses these issues is needed, but we need to remember that a policy is useless unless there are actionable steps behind it. The district's diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism policy is a starting point, but we need to make sure that it is implemented fundamentally in every classroom, every school, and at every event hosted by the district. Ensure that once you pass this policy, the work won't stop there. We need there to be more action from all board directors, all executive leadership, and all principals and faculties in every school. Thank you.
Thank you. The next business in order is the approval of the consent agenda, which includes routine personnel, minutes from our previous board meeting, and policies ADB, BG, Exhibit JRA/JRC-E1, and the repeal of policy JRA and regulation JRA-R. Directors, are there any items that you would like to pull off the consent agenda for a separate discussion and vote?
Madam Chair, I would like to pull policy ADB in light of some changes that we made at our last policy committee, and in hopes that Director After will be here with us in person so that we can take a vote together.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended, removing policy ADB from final vote and moving it to next week's meeting? And Director Ramirez, as a point of clarification, would you like to pull it and have a discussion on it this evening and move it to final vote on February 6th?
Yes, please.
Okay, so that is the motion before the board is approval of the consent agenda with the removal of ADB for a vote this evening.
I make
But
a
for-
motion to approve the consent agenda and move policy ADB for a vote at our next board meeting and for discussion tonight.
ADVR is not included in that. Is that correct, Director Ramirez?
And regulation ADBR.
I second.
I have a clarifying
Please
question.
call to vote.
Director Ramirez.
Aye.
Director Kuhlenberg.
Aye.
Director DeFreitas.
Aye.
Director Teitler. Aye. Director After.
Aye.
Directors, you've just approved the consent agenda with the removal of policy ADB and the accompanying regulation ADB-R. We'll now discuss policy ADB and regulate and ADB-R. We'll begin with Director DeFreitas. Thank you, Interim Superintendent Cole, for coming up. One sec.
First of all, I just wanted to say how deeply appreciative I am to the responsiveness and the effort of staff and the policy committee in committing the time to bring new board members along with this process and this incredibly important policy. I'm 100% behind it, and I definitely want to make sure that we set it up to be as successful in our community and as immediately effective as possible. I was obviously not part of the exhaustive work that's gone into its development. So again, I'm just grateful for the patience of my fellow board members in explaining some of it to me and coming along with me. I am interested in the timeline of implementation. And then also, I guess maybe starting off with that, I don't know if that's something you can speak to at the moment, or if it's something that we could discuss later, but I think in the notes, the comment was, are we out of compliance upon adoption? The answer is yes, which means that implementation needs to begin. And I'm interested in what that timeline looks like.
Great question. I think you're naming, and we heard this from one of our speakers tonight, this policy names the what, and you're asking more about the how, like how is this going to happen? And I know that moves into operations. I also appreciate that the board wants the plan and wants to see how we're going to do this. And the community too, we're hearing that. I would say initially in terms of timelines, there's the majority of the components when I look at ADB, especially the district will beginning at the bottom of page 2, where we talk about equitable access, racial equity analysis, workforce equity, those components. A lot of this is integrated in the strategic plan and will be deeply embedded in the priorities, initiatives. And as you remember, that strategic plan is going to have timelines and deliverables and outcomes and measures. And so we could absolutely crosswalk, I can audit this, those components with the strategic plan to make sure that they're outlined in there and identify which components are not. But I would say the vast majority we're going to see fleshed out in the how and the timelines and the deliverables through the strategic plan. I think perhaps some of the technical components around the committees that are now identified through the regulation, we won't see those necessarily in the strategic plan because those are kind of leadership groups. There's components of their work that will be in the strategic plan. For example, if you remember, the very first strategic priority is students first, and either the 1.1 or 1.2 initiative is around student representation in leadership organizations in their schools. That work would be managed and supported by the Equity Steering Committee. So it's kind of in there, but maybe some of the pieces on how are those committees going to work might not necessarily be specifically in the strategic plan. But I would say the vast majority of the how is actually going to be super aligned to our next 5-year strategic plan.
And then along with that, again, trying to stay out of the operational decisions that are many and in front of the chief level. I'm interested in where it overlaps with our purview, which is the budget considerations, turning it from good intentions into funded action.
Great question. One of the things that I think we've taken for granted in our budget that we could make more apparent are the decisions that we make that are already aligned with some of this. So you heard Chief Markham name a little bit. We talked about some of the state and federal funding, for example, the ELPA funds that come specifically to support emerging bilingual students. When we actually look at the ratios that we use as the district to invest in our CLD department, in positions in the schools, in coaches and ELD teachers, that amount that has been approved by this board in the past far exceeds what we receive from funding from the ELPA funds and the state and federal funds. And so I think there's ways that as we approach this budget season, we might be able to better elevate some of those areas where we would be where we are currently making decisions to strategically invest beyond what the grants are set for. We do that consistently in our CLDE department. We do that consistently in special education, and we do that in early childhood, where we're not limiting our spending for those programs based on what we're receiving. And so I would say those are examples of areas where we already have equitable investment strategies. Could we do more? Absolutely. Like, are there other ways to look at some of the needs of our students? I think one of the things that we've been grappling with is that the needs of our newly immigrated students, especially at the middle and high school level, are different than some of our emerging bilingual students. And we need to provide more supports for our students, for our schools, to support those kids and families and think about their needs differently than we have before. We are hoping and looking at ways that we could potentially direct investments to meet those needs. The devil's in the details of if we can do it and what that might look like. So I think there's ways as we go through the budgeting season. I'm glad you all asked Chief Markham the question of like, what's this going to look like? Because we will have work sessions. And I would challenge the board to say, like, keep asking those questions as we go through it. Hey, where are we honoring this equitable investment approaches? Where do we have existing strategies? Can you really illuminate those for us, highlight those? What is the difference between the ALPA funds and how much we're investing based on this kind of school resource frameworks and allocation frameworks? And then let's ask the question about where can we do more? Where can we be more strategic and targeted?
Yeah, and along with that, where are the gaps? in
100%.
actual funding as we move into the budget season? And then finally, I think in the recently adopted policy BG that just went through on consent agenda, there's during consideration of a policy proposal, board encourages community and staff review and input and encourages public views to be expressed. I'm just interested in how much air this policy has gotten, considering the weight of the changes that will be happening rapidly to our staff and our building leadership.
That's a great question. I would say that this policy has been deeply connected to the work of the Equity Steering Committee, which is made up of staff, but maybe there's 8 to 12 folks on that team, and the Equity Advisory Council, which is made up of a very representative, diverse group of students and families, and some community partners. I would say, though, that those groups don't really operate as representative groups. So they're not turning around from those meetings and talking to their constituents. So I do think there's a gap beyond what we've been working on with ADB through these meetings and what's been publicly posted. We haven't formally reached out to staff for input, shared kind of, a white paper on what's happening here, what we're proposing here. We haven't done that with our community. We haven't done that with our staff. So those are areas that we absolutely could take some time to let folks know a little, like, this is coming. Do you have thoughts? Do you have recommendations? I think we've done a great job with those stakeholder groups who are named in the regulation as being responsible for some of this work. And they've seen a couple iterations of it. In fact, the Equity Steering Committee or Equity Advisory Council will dig in again to the current revisions at the team's meeting tomorrow night. So they've been really close to the work. But I do think there's a gap in our broader community being aware of this if they're not tracking board meetings.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Director Tyler?
I would just like to say thank you for all the work that these different committees and groups have put together to get us to the point of where we are with ADB, and that it is my belief that we as a district will be stronger and move ahead better with a policy on diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. And I'm very happy that we're moving in that direction as a district. And I would just like to make sure, as we're looking at this educational equity and what educational equity means and how that is going to have some budgetary impacts, that as we roll that out, we're making sure that we bring everybody along with it and that we're doing some front loading as we get to that point in the process. And we're bringing along especially the leaders in the school so they can disseminate that information to their staff so that when there are questions, it can be answered along the way and we can see the reasoning why we need to move forward with this. And that is that we have different outcomes for different groups of students in our district and that we do need to do something differently for those students. And so I would just like to say I'm very happy that we're moving in this direction.
Thanks. You know, I appreciate that nudge. And I think what you named, Director Tytler, is one of the things I heard you mention was how do we make it clear to leaders and staff of the how and the why of these allocations? And I do want to just remind you all of our 23-24 strategic plan has a school resource allocation team whose goal is to develop better tools to articulate that specifically. And so we're working on how do we make it more clear and apparent how we are. You heard Chief Markham say that the schools are getting their budgets here in the next couple of weeks. Those are really complex. We don't, those are not very readable or reader friendly, user friendly beyond the school leaders. So we're really trying to better develop some tools that our partner, like our stakeholders, our community, our staff can look at and really understand how and why we see different staffing levels at different schools or different roles at different schools. And hopefully it'll start us being able to achieve what you're naming.
Thank you.
Director After.
Thanks. I don't have any other questions on the substance of the policy. Thanks, Anna, for coming back up to talk about it again after the discussion last time. I've read it several times and I'm comfortable with it. Thanks also to members of the public for engaging in this. I did have just a clarifying question for the board, because there was a comment that we aren't voting on it because I'm remote. So I did just want to understand that, because it was my impression that I'm still fully functioning here as a board member, can vote, et cetera, just because I'm remote. So can you just clarify?
Yeah, so when we were in policy committee last night, we thought that you were not going to be here at all. And so that was a big part of the consideration in moving this and making the decision to move this to consent. And then obviously we didn't get the notice that you would be here in person or that you would be here remotely until later this afternoon. So in light of all the changes and you not being here, we made the decision in policy committee to hold off so that we could have the full board vote on it on February 6th. And then when your plans changed, it didn't seem to make sense to shift the previous decision of policy committee in such a tight time frame.
Okay, thanks. That makes more sense. Yeah, I changed a flight so I could be here today and participate. So thanks.
We very much appreciate that. Director Ramirez.
Thank you. And Director After, it will feel different with you here in person with us. I just wanted to take a second to, last Monday, all of our students and all of us observed a day of observance and honoring a great American hero and leader. And I wanted to start off my 2 minutes by quoting something that I think is incredibly important and timely as it pertains to this policy. So, we must face the honest fact that we still have a long way to go before the problem of racial injustice is solved. Let nobody give you the impression that the problem of racial injustice will work itself out. Let nobody give you the impression that only time will solve the problem. That is a myth. And it is a myth because time is neutral. It can be used either constructively or destructively. It may well be that we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic works and violent actions of the bad people who bomb a church in Birmingham, Alabama, or shoot down a civil rights worker in Selma, but for the appalling silence and indifference of the good people who sit around and say, wait on time. Somewhere we must come to see that human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals. Without this hard work, time becomes an ally of the primitive forces of social stagnation. So we must help time and realize that the time is always right to do right. The great Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. I want to thank the fellow district alumni for speaking tonight. I think, yes, there has been a lot of conversation around this policy. And I just wanted to reiterate that all of us as board members should take it as a great responsibility of ourselves to make time to ask the community for input, however that may look for us and our communities, because it is important that we as the directors and managers of policies of the district do that job well. Those are my 2 minutes.
Thank you. I wanted to round us out by, again, thanking everyone that's contributed this, to moving this forward, specifically Director Ramirez. It's been a long road to get here, to get to this point where we're talking about this for a third time at a public board meeting. And also to address a couple of things. First, any regulations, most regulations that are brought to the board at a board meeting are required by law to be approved by the board. This regulation is not. So when we're talking about the operational of the what versus the how, this is just a courtesy look at ADB-R. This doesn't require a board vote, which is why it wasn't in the notes, the heading when we were talking about the pulling things off of the consent agenda. That wouldn't require approval of the board, and changing it wouldn't require approval or consent of the board. And the other thing that I keep coming back to when we talk about community input is this idea or notion that this is going to cause rapid changes within our district. And I think one of the things that we heard throughout the process of getting to here with this policy is we're doing these things. We're trying to make progress on these things, and these things are happening. So from my perspective, we're not going to see a swath of massive changes. Rather, it's the point that I tried to make last time. This is now empowering the board to be able to be sure that we continue in the direction that we have identified, and to continue in a purposeful way, and to have the tools that we need to ensure that that happens in future boards as well. So I really greatly appreciate the time and energy that Dr. Cole has put into this over the last few months. I greatly appreciate the time and energy that Director Ramirez has put into it, and all of the additional stakeholders that we have reached out to. And I would also just echo that it is incumbent upon us as board members to continue to do that outreach, and upon the community to be aware of what's going on and to be involved and engaged, because it is a continual two-way street. So we'll now move into 5 minutes of open board discussion.
I also wanted to add, just when it comes to our district budget, I think it's really important for us as board members to recognize that one of our functions is approving the budget and making sure that the budget tells the direction and the hopes of the district. In the economics class, one of Dr. Rosa, who is one of the main educators in that, always says your budget should reflect your values. Mm-hmm. And I think our district has made a really great effort to try to get to that place where we can be proud not only of the way we do budgeting, but the way that we do policy making, where we really rely on the superintendent and the team to do the work. We set the expectation and the vision and the hope for the future, and we rely heavily on the team to be able to do the work and to make sure that the rest of the school district sees the path forward. So I just want to echo that I think it's imperative for us to do our job well, so that the rest of the district understands how to be able to function towards a brighter future for our students, but most importantly, for a future that involves equity within the whole institution of the organization.
So just going back to that effort in outreach, do you think there's an opportunity to reach out to staff in a timely fashion? I know you have so much on your plate right now. I'm interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, and y'all refresh my memory because I'm not remembering quite why we talked about this, but Monday, executive team made the recommendation to our communications teams to start including in our staff and family newsletters kind of an update of things that are happening in the board. Actually, I think it had to do with the animals in schools policy. And we were saying, like, how are we making sure that, everybody's paying attention and seeing the operational needs of these new policies. And so one of the practices that Chief Landon is going to start with the next round of our staff newsletters is a section where we kind of explain to staff, you know, here's what's going on in the board meetings, here's what you should be aware of, here's some implications for practice. So, you know, because we set that intention and have the placeholder ready for the staff newsletter, what I anticipate we'll be doing after this meeting is sharing this policy and saying like, hey, pay attention, you know, take a look at this. This is the regulation. If you have questions, concerns, you know, here are the right people to reach out to in regards to this. So I think at least at that level in that staff newsletter that will, I think it comes out Friday or Monday. Friday will be Monday. So we can include that kind of blurb about this policy and the other pieces that we're going to talk about or that you just actually approved for the community and lift those things up so that folks kind of know how to plug in and how, you know, if they're not reading all your minutes after every meeting to stay in tune, that they'll get that information. So that is already kind of on our to-do list. And I think if the board wanted anything else, if the board wanted to direct me to do additional forums or getting input, we could talk more about that.
And it's also gone out as a subject line in the last several notices about board meetings to the broad community since December, since mid-December. So,
yep.
Any other questions, comments from the board on ADB? Okay, the motion was to push this to a vote on February 6th, so we will move on. The next business in order is discussion on policies. All right. KFA on first read, JB on first read, JRA/JRC on second read, and JRA/JRCR on second read. And this is just a discussion. None of these are on final read, so there will not be a vote. We will begin with Director After. This time around.
Thanks. I don't have any questions about the BG and the JRA policies on the agenda.
Thank you. Director Ramirez.
Just thank you to the team for meeting with us. I think most of our questions were answered at policy committee. Was there anything that we needed to follow up on at this meeting for responses? I don't think so, right? No, no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Director DeFreitas.
My question. Sorry. My question was just JB. I'm looking over the notes and it says it's a new policy and it's equal educational opportunities. And I'm interested in your perspective on how it overlaps with ADB that we were just talking about. I guess maybe if you could clarify where the difference is, what this impacts, what the scope of this one is versus what we just discussed.
I would say at a very high level, and then Chief Park, you should weigh in. This one is required by statute that we have on the books. And I think ADB goes much further in our commitment to equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism. So I think this is a baseline that we need to have. And I think ADB goes further in alignment with the priorities of our board.
So it's a new one, but it's required. Maybe I'm not asking the right questions there, sorry.
Say ADB more explicitly calls out the actions that we would
Right.
take versus this being very high level, review the curriculum, make sure there's student access, there's district support. And ADB goes into much more detail.
So you don't see any future opportunities for, say, changes made to JB to impact the implementation of ADB or vice versa? That there's not enough shared like Venn diagram space?
That you could maybe make JB hold everything.
Or just
Yeah.
even inhibit, or like in a negative way, if it's not aligned, is that, I don't know, is that gonna be an issue?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm curious as to whether we did cross-reference ADB in
Okay.
this, once it's approved. So I think that's helpful. because we see the connection. But I think at least in our read there, we didn't see any kind of conflict of interest, or it definitely feels a little duplicitous, but
Not
duplicative.
duplicit.
Thank you.
Duplicate.
Thank you.
And those are my questions.
Okay. Thank you. Director Tytler?
I'm good, thank you.
I too am good. I feel like we got a deep dive in these. I think to answer your question a little bit, Section J is specific to students. So those policies are all related to the legal rights of our students primarily, and discipline and other subject matter that's only about students, where ADB is much broader and it's more about kind of the foundational visioning side of our schools and how do we achieve equity across our schools, top to bottom, left to right. That's the way that I see them as being different. But I have no further questions on these policies. I appreciate the work and all of the consult that has gone into some of these complex policies. So thank you. We'll now have 5 minutes of open board discussion if anyone has anything else.
I was just gonna add, I'm also just saw Brent's answers to those questions we had about immigration status. So thank you for including that. And yeah, I was just gonna follow up to reiterate what Director Kuhlenberg just said about where they fall within our policies, and it's just a very different way of viewing where our district holds them and their reach. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Okay. Can I have as clarification, are we voting on calendar tonight for first read, or is this just?
Yeah, it's my understanding the vote will be on the second read.
Okay,
So it's
no
just
vote
for
is needed.
information and discussion
Okay.
tonight.
Thank
And
you.
I'm going to sit here when we talk about that so I can work with Director
Okay.
After.
So we'll now discuss the proposed 24-25 academic calendar. First read, as Chief Landon just confirmed, will not require a vote. Second read and vote will be at our next board meeting on February 6th. And we will start with Director Ramirez.
Thank you, team, for all the work done on this. Thank you to the calendar committee. Thank you for all of the time, work, surveys, everything that has gone out. I just wanted to ask, I know that the committee has some priorities that are important for the committee, and I was hoping you could share that with us.
Sure. Yep. The four main priorities and parameters as we're thinking about the calendar in rank order are student learning, that's first. And then the second one is setting teachers up to do their best teaching. The third priority would be economic imperatives for our staff, our students and families. And then the fourth one is considering recreation, vacation, and family time. So we took that approach as we're thinking about the calendar. There are a number of other considerations. We mentioned a couple of them in the memo, but those are the four priorities that really guided our planning.
And I also wanted to know if you could share a little bit about the work done thus far on this calendar year and the hopes that you guys have for where we will be in a year.
Yeah. So we assembled a calendar committee kind of late in the fall, and then we sent out a survey to the community, got over 650 responses. As you can imagine, they're all a wide range of opinions and desires that were presented in the survey. And given that it was late in the year, and I know that the community was hoping for a two years of calendar, but we felt like we needed more time to engage deeply with the community. And so we decided to do a 1-year calendar instead. That's very similar to this year's calendar, the 23-24 calendar, with the plan this spring to engage this community more deeply on bigger potential changes or updates to the calendar. And the goal is to set out a 3-year calendar for 25, 26, 26, 27, and 27, 28, which I think is a lofty goal, but I feel like this gives us a lot more time versus having a really rushed fall time. We know the community also looks forward to having a calendar earlier in the year. We got a lot of requests to release calendars by December. And again, just so we can make sure that we engage with the community thoughtfully, we thought that it was important to do that.
And we did go over this in the work session, but I just wanted to make sure to ask, what are the districts that we are currently aligned with in regards to our calendar?
Aligned as in timing or aligned
Yeah.
as?
Are we close in alignment with our breaks for, not obviously this one, but the one that we are being presented with today?
Right. Aspen, RE2, Garfield 16. We also looked at Eagle's calendar. Eagle happens to have a spring break that is off from, they have I think a week in February and a week in April. We have one at the end of March, but it's largely aligned all in the breaks with those three districts, Aspen, RE2, Garfield 16.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Thank you. Director DeFreitas.
I just wanted to reiterate the appreciation for your responsiveness and the teachers and other staff and folks who took time to fill out the survey, and recognizing that we just sort of need to walk an unusual middle ground to find the best solution here and to give these difficult issues the time that they need. And I think that was just a good example of being able to find a space where the community can, if not agree on every line item, at least see a path forward together. And I just appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into that.
Thank you.
Director Tyler.
I would just like to thank the committee who put together the calendar. It's a difficult task, and much like Chief Park said, we did give a survey, and we're not ignoring the survey results that we get, but it is a very difficult task when 100 people respond and you get 40 people who think one way, 25 people who think one way, 20 people who think another way. There's going to be people who aren't thinking that their voice is heard, but we did hear the voices, and we tried our best to take all those differing opinions and put it into the best place that we thought could fit what is those 4 priorities that were mentioned, and still try to meet the needs of the people who responded to the survey.
Thank you. Director After.
Thank you, and apologies for having to miss the work session where you all discussed this. Actually, I had a bunch of questions. I think Jasmine asked every single one of them. So thank you, Director Ramirez. I did just want to comment that I really appreciate the work of the committee put into this. I know it's a ton of effort to try to balance all the requests and needs, and this is the topic that it seems like folks in the district engage me very often. I don't know about the rest of you, but I get a lot of comments about the calendar. When's the calendar coming out? People are very passionate about it, which I take to the way I interpret that is that they want their kids to be in school, and so they want to schedule their vacations and their breaks and their visits to family out of state, et cetera, around when they can ensure that their kids are in school the maximum number of days. So I'm grateful to the community for being so engaged on the calendar, and yeah, look forward to voting on this one and in the near future, and then hearing more about the more extended process going forward. So thanks, Chief Park.
Thank you for the explanation work session and during open meeting here. I think we're all grateful to have a proposed calendar coming out to address some of those questions about what it's going to look like for next year, and looking forward to the process in the future. I just wanted to again say I very much appreciate the alignment with our surrounding districts. I think we really are a regional community, and taking that into consideration has a very real impact for our kids and our families. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
We'll now move into 5 minutes of open discussion. If anybody else has anything? Okay, seeing nothing else. Thank you, Chief Park. Thank you. Our next business in order is action on an amended 23-24 budget with Chief Markham. Do I have a motion to approve the amended 23-24 budget as presented?
I make a motion to approve the lost myself 23-24 budget as presented.
Is there a second?
I second.
We'll now move into discussion. Each board member will have 2 minutes, and we'll have 5 minutes of open discussion. We're a little off in the cadence since I started with Director Tyler, so we're going to start with Director DeFreitas.
I don't currently have any questions.
Director Tyler, and if you need extra time, go for it.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. The first one is, I'm curious about on page 15 of the PDF that we were given, which is a second link there. On that page, it says that we're keeping a $12,350,000 ending balance in the bond redemption fund. Can you explain what that means?
Certainly, I would like to clarify that this was for reference and it's the current budget as passed by the board. We're only approving tonight the new fund for the health insurance, but we owe bonds. We've borrowed to pay for Riverview School for all the upgrades we did in 2016, and we make one interest payment in June and an interest and principal payment in December. And so that's essentially the balance sitting in that fund that will pay that.
So that balance that is in the fund of that $12 million is to pay those twice yearly payments that we need to pay.
Yes, so the mill levies that the board approves, one of those is the bond mill levy. The funds don't even come to us. They go to this escrow fund and sit there, and the escrow pays it on our behalf.
And can you tell us what is the outstanding balance that it is on that payment? Like, what do we still have to pay in total on that bond fund?
Director Tyler, this is outside of the scope of what the amendment is that's being presented, because this is the budget that was passed for the current fiscal year that we're in. So right now, I don't
Okay.
know that Chief Markham is prepared to speak on.
It's roughly $150 million outstanding.
Okay, thank you. So is my understanding then that this is supposed to be just pertaining to that one section?
Yeah, that's the amendment, is adding that fund to the budget as presented or as passed last June.
And then the full budget that we had there that was given in that link was just to give us background information.
Yeah, it's basically to say that Fund 64, the health insurance fund, is being added to that packet. That's the amendment.
Okay. So any other questions that I would have on that PDF that I did go through would be at another time that we would be discussing that?
I mean, that's this current year's budget
Okay.
that we're 6 months into. I'm happy to sit down one-on-one or answer any questions you have, as I know that document's lengthy. I basically excerpted that from the budget that this board passed last June.
Okay. I'd be happy then another
Yeah.
time to find that one-on-one time. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Director after. Mike's off.
Thanks. Chief Markham, can you just clarify the request? It's to move $8.6 million into a newly created health insurance fund that's what we use this for, insurance self-pay, basically.
Yeah, so on the June budget passed by the Board of Education, the general fund and other funds reflect health insurance premiums being paid. Because we're now self-funded, we need a separate fund to show that we're actually still collecting those, and this is segregating those health insurance premiums into the separate fund. Previously, it was like paying a gas bill. You pay and it goes to the third party and they manage your healthcare. Now we're managing those expenses and we need to reflect that on our books. So that's what it's here for. It's to make sure we legally appropriate these funds and that it's shown clearly for everybody to see.
And did we change anything about our benefits plans or anything, or is this purely the mechanism by which we're paying for it?
So we are now wholly self-insured. So meaning we're paying our own claims out of this as opposed to being part of a larger pool. We now have $0 copays, $0 generic drugs. There were some changes that went along with it as well.
Thanks.
Director Ramirez.
I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to add a comment, and I wonder if this would be helpful for my colleagues is, you know, I have shared with our team before, I enjoy a good memo. And I think it would be wise for us to possibly put the memo prior to, I don't know if that's possible through Diligent. But I think that might be helpful so that there's like an understanding that the memo is as it pertains to the items below. I don't know if it's possible.
If-
Well, it is, but it's the third item. So just a point of help. Thank you, Chief Markham.
Yep, you're welcome.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions. I appreciate the explanation. If there are any further comments or questions from the board, we'll go into 5 minutes of open discussion. Seeing none, can you please call the vote, Chief Landon?
Director Kuhlenberg,
Aye.
Director DeFreitas,
Aye.
Director Titler,
Aye.
Director After,
Aye.
and Director Ramirez.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Madam Chair, sorry, point of clarification. Are we reading out the budget amendment resolution or no?
I don't believe we have to, but
Okay.
I'm happy to. If anybody would like to hear me read it.
I just wanted to make
Okay.
sure we didn't have to do that.
I don't believe we have to. Do you believe we have to?
I feel like we have read resolutions in the past.
We have, I think mainly because they were for
Yeah, you're right.
celebrations. But
I was gonna say, I think when they're
Chief Markham.
honoring some, I think when they're honoring someone
Will
else.
you honor?
Yeah.
Would you like me to read you the resolution?
I wrote it. I think I'm good.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Director Ramirez.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Markham. The next business in order is board reports and comments. We'll begin with Director Titler.
Really, the only report that I have is we're waiting to get BOCES up and running. There's been some problems trying to coordinate times, but that is coming up hopefully soon in the future. And then as far as Meadowood, they continue to be doing a great job there. They've continuing to gain back a few days at a time every week, it seems. So one of the units will certainly be ready to move in prior to being able to have school start, and trying to gain some time to get as close as we can to that. And then as far as meeting with the housing committee, there's been talk about how we're going to try to shuffle the different houses and which people are wanting to move into which units, and trying to come up with some protocols on how we can figure out to get people moved in a timely way before school starts for next year.
Excellent. Thank you. Director After.
Thanks. I had the opportunity to participate in the Wellness Committee meeting last week, the Family Advisory Council meeting last week, and I attended the Basalt High School drug and alcohol strategy session, and I just wanted to share that they were well attended, great engagement from parents, staff, district office leadership, community health partners, and extremely well mediated and facilitated by the team, Kelly and Joel. And so good discussions, and I was glad to be able to participate in those.
Thank you. Director Ramirez.
We had our first, or I had my first meeting with the Urban Renewal Authority. It was a very short 30-minute meeting, but I'm glad that we are able to participate, as it seems that the conversations are starting to have more action behind the meeting, which I appreciate. And I wanted to mention as well that I'm heading to Washington with the Federal Relations Network, with CASB, the Colorado Association of School Boards, to represent rural Colorado, and our school district, which I'm very excited about. So I would just encourage anyone, any of our staff, any of our history teachers, anyone who is interested, who would want to send a letter or a card or a thank you to any of our federal delegation for Colorado, to please reach out to me. I'm happy to take them with me. I'm excited that we're going to be meeting with most of the Colorado federal delegation. And then just to follow up on Director After, I might have missed the date for the rescheduling of the Glenwood Springs High School event. And so I just wanted to make sure that I asked that question before the night ended.
The Glenwood Springs event is not planned to be rescheduled, but we will be replacing it with a recorded session in English and Spanish and posting those on our website with the same content, along with the ability for public to submit feedback via an online survey and questionnaire.
I mean, I think you guys know that I'm gonna say that I feel like Glenwood Springs is a really big area for us to miss this opportunity. I think a lot of our parents and students are quite concerned about the issues that are affecting that high school particularly. So I would encourage our team to reconsider and to try to find the time to. I think that this particularly this conversation around drugs, especially in a area that is such high density, is really important. So I just want to make sure I share that opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Director DeFreitas.
I just wanted to say that I appreciated getting to sit down with members of the community who showed up for the coffee chats that we had going about the superintendent hiring process, and received a lot of really good questions that helped direct areas that I need to learn more about to accurately represent and make sure that I'm asking the questions that I need to as well. I appreciated that we could all meet in our communities at different times, and I encourage the community, as always, to get on the website and check out the timeline. We updated it last meeting 2 weeks ago for superintendent hiring. And if you go to the main Roaring Fork School District website, it's in the left-hand column. You click on that, it'll take you to information. And the deadline for the advisory committee applications is February 1st. So that's, coming right up. So if you've been considering how you can weigh in and how you can be a part of the conversation, to hire somebody to lead our district, please consider that application and do some outreach. If you have people in your circles who you think should be on it, force them to apply. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Reports, I feel like there's always a lot going on and lots to report. The coffee chats, I think, were overall successful. Obviously, I think we would have liked a broader and more diverse crew attending all in all. But I'm hopeful that we as a board will continue to offer those opportunities to the community. And I have another legislative review committee meeting on Friday. Nothing major coming out quite yet, but I'll keep you all apprised as we move further into the session. And other reports, I think, are just around the hiring process. And it was great to get a high level overview of what that will look like. And that again is all on the website. So we'll now move into board appreciations. We will begin with Director After.
Thanks. Thanks to Chief Landon for accommodating my virtual participation today, as I'm on a work required trip to the East Coast, so appreciate it. Thanks also to the team at Bridges High School. I had a really awesome visit there last week. Was that just last week? And I learned a ton. I got some, along with Chief Park and Dr. Cole, got to spend some time in classrooms, chat with the leadership there, and it was a really just invaluable experience. So thanks for making it happen to staff and to the team at Bridges.
Thank you. Director Ramirez.
Yeah, I just want to echo some gratitude to our community members who came out for the coffee chats. We like Director DeFredi shared, we want to make sure that the community continues to engage with us, email us, call us. I think it's really important for us to be able to continue, like Director Kuhlenberg shared, to do some of these coffee chats. They seem to be really productive, and just thank you to the community for making the effort to come and speak with us. And then I just want to really give an appreciation to our team. I know that there are a lot of moving parts to our board and our district. It feels like it's been that way for a really long time, but I know that recently, especially with us picking up the superintendent search again, that there's a lot of programming and scheduling, and so just thank you to the team for making an effort to help us be successful. I think it's really important, and we appreciate so much your hard work.
Director DeFredi.
Thanks. I want to appreciate the work being done by the Aspen Hope Center in our schools currently, making mental health resources available just down the hall for kids, so supporting counselors, and the hard work of the staff from this district and the center to maintain that kind of accessibility is so important. They have relationships with kids before there are difficult issues to resolve, and building on that and working with them in a place they're already comfortable. There is just so much value in that for our families, my family included, who may not know how to start that process or how to access it outside of these walls that we are comfortable in. So I just wanted to appreciate that.
Thank you. Director Teitler.
I have a few thank yous I'd like to say. First of all, is to Orem Fork High School for hosting a school visit the other day. There's lots of great things going on there. There's lots of good programming, and I especially appreciated the way that teachers are getting together in groups to, according to their subject, to work together to help with making students learn in a way that seems like will be effective there. So I really appreciate that. I want to also say thank you to the CRES community who has really stepped up in Amy Brockman's absence there. There's been a lot of people who have been there and given extra effort there. And I know Kendall Riley has really done a great job of organizing and keeping a lot of things afloat that is extra to her job. And also thank you to, I know at least Joel Hathaway and Cora Carballera has come and stepped up and done some extra help there. And so thank you for everybody who's rallying behind that community.
I want to echo the thanks to the community members that came out and participated this week, and to everyone that's participated throughout the process. We've started to get emails from community and just acknowledge that we are receiving those, we are reading those, and we appreciate having that input. I also wanted to give a special thanks to our students. I feel like a lot of the time we miss that piece in our appreciations, and we think about all of the people that are making these systems work. But the way that they've showed up through the strategic planning process and through a lot of these other processes recently where we're looking for input and feedback, I think has been really important and really powerful, that, they're not just consumers of the system, but they're actively participating in shaping it and moving it forward. And so just giving a shout out to them and encouraging their continued and increased participation, and echoing Director Ramirez and thanking the team that's sitting here for all of the extra work that is going into these next couple of months and weeks, especially as things ramp up. So thank you all. The next business in order is an executive session pursuant to CRS section 24-6, 4024A, concerning the potential purchase, acquisition, or lease of a home for Superintendent Housing, inviting Chiefs Baumfock and Markham. Do I have a motion to move into executive session?
I move that the Board of Education move into executive session pursuant to CRS section 24-6-4024A concerning the potential purchase, acquisition, or lease of a home for superintendent housing, inviting, do I need to put that part? Chief Baumfock and Chief Mark.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Did you get Director after?
Aye.
The time is 7:59 PM and the board will now move into executive session. Upon return from executive session, we will be back in this room. The time is 8:36 PM and the board has returned from executive session. If there's no further business and no objection, the meeting will be adjourned. It is 8:36 PM.